Okay, greetings everybody. I'm Don Taylor from Main Street Middle School and PLP Pathways, and this is our 8th webinar of the year. Today we're going to be talking and reflecting on how teachers and students are linking evidence to goals and proficiencies. We may also get into a discussion about transitions because it is that time of year, and how folks are wrapping up their PLPs. Before we go any further and the panelists introduce themselves, again, I'm Don Taylor. I'm a co-director of PLP Pathways, and this work is supported by the Middle Grades Institute and the Middle Grades Collaborative and the Tarrant Institute for Innovative Education. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us, and if the panelists could just introduce themselves briefly, we'll get right into it.
Hi, I'm Laura Wheeler. I'm the Proficiency-Based Learning Technology Integration Coach for the Lamoille South Supervisory Union.
Hi, I'm Kevin Peely-Hunt. I'm a 5A generalist on Swift House at Wilson Central School.
I'm Allison Gauthier. I teach high school science at U32 in East Montpelier.
All right. So I know that we've talked about goals and we've talked about proficiencies and we've talked about evidence quite a bit over the course of the year, but I wanted to bring it up again now because a lot of folks are having their spring conferences. They're meeting with families. If you're teaching 8th graders or even 7th graders or 6th graders or 9th graders, for that matter, many of us are helping kids get ready for the transition to their next life and learning stage. And we're starting to conduct activities where kids are reflecting on their PLPs, they're reflecting on their goals, and they're trying to link their evidence of their learning to those specific goals and to demonstrate proficiency and that they're ready for the next level. And I would just like to hear from folks. I can start out with a really brief discussion about where I am, and then I'd like to hear folks kind of respond to that, and we'll kind of go from there. And before we go any further, Lindsay, do you want to introduce yourself real quickly?
Sure. Sorry I'm late. I was having some technical issues. I'm Lindsay Hallman, and I'm a middle level educator at Essex Middle School.
All right, thanks again for joining us. So we just finished our second conference of the year last week, and in our conference we've shifted to a model where the PLP is the centerpiece of the conference, that families come in, the students, we review with the students sort of a script, and they introduce their PLPs to their parents. They spend a lot of time going through the different elements of the PLP, including relationships and citizenship and exploration, but then they really focus on their goals and their evidence and what evidence of their learning is demonstrating that they're ready for high school or they're ready for 8th grade. And I mean, I think it went well. But I want to make sure that kids are really understanding how their evidence is demonstrating their proficiencies. And that seems like a piece that I'm continually working on and I haven't mastered yet with the kids. And so right now, again, as part of that process, we're setting new goals and we're reflecting and we're always going back to the evidence, you know, and asking kids what demonstrates that you're getting proficient in these transferable skills, what demonstrates that you're meeting proficiencies in your courses. And, you know, it's not the same for everybody. Kids are in different places. But what are some specifics that you guys are doing with your students or strategies that you're using with your students to help them sort of use the language of proficiencies, use the language of the transferable skills to demonstrate independently that they are mastering what they need to do to get to the next level? And we can start with Maura and just go right down the line.
So part of the work that I've been focusing on recently has been helping teachers to do this very thing. And so one of the first things that we think about is being really clear with our students, making sure that our students understand what it is that we're working towards, whether it's one of the transferable skills that we're providing practice for, or it's one of the proficiencies. So having a really clear objective and also making sure that it makes sense to the students. So is it in language that the students understand? It's a great time to partner with kids, have the kids help you craft what that learning objective might look like. Having it on the board is not enough. And then also helping students help you establish a criteria for success. So what would it look like if we were to, you know, achieve this or be proficient in this skill? So that creates that really clear target for the student. The student's really clear. So I think that's one of the first things that I always think about when thinking about asking students to find evidence of their learning. They need to know what it is that they're trying to find evidence for. And then the other piece will be making sure that you're providing those opportunities in the classroom, being really clear about those connections. And I think, you know, we talk a lot about reflecting with students and how that needs to be a constant practice, and kids also need to get feedback based on how they're doing on their reflection, or maybe the evidence that they're selecting. I used to scaffold it a little bit by, you know, I would have a scale that we had been working on, let's say, and I might say, here are 5 possible pieces of evidence that we worked on in class. You might also have things from other classes or other places. So at least every kid could identify something. So it would start with that scaffold, and then eventually, after giving them some feedback, they would be able to be a little bit stronger at gathering that evidence, or thinking about, oh, I should take a picture of this thing in design and tech class because it's going to help me have evidence of whatever it is that that they were working towards, whatever that goal was. And so those are some of the pieces that I think about when I think about students collecting evidence of their learning, both for the transferable skills and for proficiencies.
Lindsay?
Yeah, I would just echo a lot. Ooh, there I am. Am I still there?
Yes.
You're good, yeah.
Okay. I would echo what Maura said. You know, first of all, putting the learning target in learner-friendly language is really important, and then offering a lot of practice with what evidence of proficiency would look like. So again, I mean, I was just jotting down my thoughts, and then Maura was saying exactly what I was thinking around scaffolding. So like, this is what, like, let's do this together. Let's do this in a group. Let's do this in a partnership, and then on your own, which I think is just, you know, we do as teachers, you know, in our strategies. And so that's what I think about when I'm thinking about the content proficiencies. And then the transferable skills is, you know, having those be a part of their everyday language, so that, and always every week having them pull evidence of, we've kind of put our focus on 1 or 2 a week that we want them to focus in on for a long period of time. So like, you know, this month or this 2 months, we're going to really focus on, you know, responsible and involved citizenship, or clear and effective communication, and then pulling evidence of that and reflecting on it as to why that represents evidence. So again, I would just echo everything around the language, scaffolding, the feedback and reflection, and then of course the time. Time to get, you know, time for them to have the opportunity to pull evidence and demonstrate that this is a connection to this proficiency.
So Lindsay and Maura, I have just one quick question for you. So as you're talking about this, I'm thinking the numbers of learning targets or objectives that I would be pulling evidence for is shrinking dramatically, right? Because there's no way that I could have kids, like, you know, when you thought, what's the language we need to be using in class? How are we going to repeat this over time? And how am I going to have kids understand that language and pull different pieces of evidence to meet that learning objective? So one question I had for you was, one is numbers, like how many learning targets are you talking about, maybe even across the year? And is it specifically just sort of your transferable skills? But then also the periods, like how long are you working on each of those objectives? Are they across the whole year? Or do you really focus on some based on what you're doing at the time? So for teachers out there who are saying, wow, you know, what learning objectives should I really focus on, and how long should I focus on them? What would you recommend for those folks?
That is a big question.
Yeah,
I think it's different depending on context. I think it's different depending on the grain size of the proficiency that we're talking about. Our classroom teachers have, I think we have 11 indicators for literacy. So reading, writing, speaking, and listening, writing process. But the nature of that, for example, reading key ideas, that there are 3 indicators, but they cluster together in a way that really is around comprehension, for example. And so I think it depends. Sometimes some of these learning targets, they cluster well together. And so when I say cluster, they're very complementary. You can embed them within each other. There are others that, are writing. You probably want to be focusing on one genre of writing if that's what your mini lessons are around. So it might just be argumentative writing. Some are cycles, so maybe you revisit a few times throughout the year. Others really may be one proficiency that you work on throughout the year. For example, reading comprehension, that's one that I really think about. You have different expectations across the year, and you have those goals and benchmarks for your kids. Whereas, another one, it might be just within one unit that you're really focused on it. So I think it really depends on how the unit, the year-long map is developed for the teacher. And I also think it depends a bit on the content area. So not a very clear answer, but it's definitely something that, as teachers, I think we're needing to consider and really think through, because that's one of the big shifts instructionally.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I was just going to add on really quickly, I'm just going to take my science tours as an example. I think it's really important that we take one big, with next generation science standards, they're written in a way that it's a very comprehensive proficiency or standard that you can go in great depth in many ways and demonstrate, and pull evidence. So for instance, right now I'm in a mini part of a larger unit around structure and function of living organisms. And so in that is learners can understand the different parts of a cell and model that as a part of a system. And so we can talk about systems, we can talk about all the different parts of the cell as a system. And I can give them a variety of ways to demonstrate that, but that's a big overarching idea with a lot of, that we can really go deep into. And then on top of that, throughout the year, and they've been exposed to these proficiencies or standards from day one, is the whole engineering design process as well. And so those are pieces that come up throughout. And then, of course, then you've got the transferable skills. So it's kind of like these 3 columns in many ways. You've got strictly content, the design and the engineering design process, or any kind of design process kind of piece. And then you've got your transferable skills is how I look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you very much. Kevin and Allison, any thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to speak, just kind of piggyback off this conversation. I think, and maybe now I'm hearing you all say it, we're wondering if it wasn't the right thing, but in our sites, when we've been putting in evidence related to a specific proficiency, we've been reflecting at the standard level. Mm-hmm. So we're in the weeds of astronomy, but when they go to put in that proficient product, whether it's a model or a speech or a Google Doc into their site, they're reflecting at the cause, change, and effect level. Mm-hmm. And that feels less nitpicky and more I'm building this breadth of knowledge in structure and function, or in change, cause, and effect. So that's kind of how I've been looking at it this year, Dawn. And I don't know whether, good or bad, but that's just a different approach.
No, I mean, it's just already there's just so many different ideas swimming around out there from the last 10 minutes. Kevin, what about you?
Yeah, so with our students, we have them pick the goals, one for each transferable skill. And going back to that original point that everybody's been talking about, the language, I think that's one of the key pieces, and one of the most important pieces is when you're coming up with these goals and students are creating them, especially at the 5th and 6th grade level. It's important that they're creating goals that make sense to them. So I'm always asking them, all right, what does that mean? What does that look like? It's okay to tweak the language and not have it sound like education jargon, because we want them to be able to reflect on it every week and understand what it means. And for us, what's nice, since the goals are they're broad based on, the different transferable skills. So the evidence that they're pulling for those on a weekly basis, we give them time every week to pull evidence and do a quick reflection. They're coming from class or coming from outside of school, and it's nice to get them seeing that these skills are transferable as they're meant to be, and getting them to just jot down whenever they're putting a goal or a piece of evidence in, just jot down how it connects. That's been just life-changing for us for the conferences, because obviously the students are putting these pieces of evidence in throughout the trimester. By the time they get to their conference, they might not have seen that piece for a while, but they can read and say, oh yeah, this one math assessment showed that I was really persevering when I got stuck on this problem, and I was using some of my resources to help me out. But it's nice to get them just constantly thinking about, what does the goal mean to them? Why is it important? And these are all just reflection-based questions that we ask them, on a week-to-week basis, really. So by the time, they're coming up to their conference, we can say, all right, what's your problem-solving goal? And they can rattle it off, and they have, at least 4 pieces of evidence to show their growth. And now that we're all a standards-based system, whenever they're pulling evidence in from their academic setting, those are all based on the proficiencies too. So like, that's where our connection is if you're, getting a 3 or 4, on a learning scale, and a certain, class lesson or whatever you're doing in class assessment, and that's showing up on your PLP, to show growth in this transferable skill goal, it all ties in, it's nice to see that.
So, okay. So these are all really important comments and ideas, and there's a couple that I want to go back to. So one of them is, it sounds like, so one thing, first of all, that I want to give kudos to is Lindsay and Kevin. I think you guys were talking about weekly goals where you have on a Monday, and maybe you all do this, but where on a Monday meeting, you have the kids set like a goal for the week, and then on a Friday, they review and reflect on that goal. And then they also do the emails, right? So I've started doing that in my practice. And now what I'm trying to do is, kids aren't always connecting that weekly goal to their bigger trimester goals. And so we're trying to make it so that the kids are reflecting and pulling evidence so that they can show proficiency in those goals. But I think also what Morris said is that you have to be clear about what your learning objectives are specifically so that kids understand that. And when you say, hey, can you pull evidence towards this goal, they know exactly what you're talking about. But there's just a couple things that I want to go back to. And my first question is for Lindsay, which is the design process. Are you telling me that that's important enough now that you're including that as like a major part of your program? And how is that looking? And how would a kid be experiencing that in your program?
Well, I think it's always been a part, but I feel like it's very much reflected in the next generation science standards.
Right.
You'll see that very much reflected in the language, as well as the language of project-based learning and, the cycle of inquiry, whatever you want to call it, and so, yeah, I mean, that's always been a foundation of everything. Like, it starts with, whether it's project-based learning where you start with a question and you get into research, and then you're creating an action plan and goals, and you're reaching out to the community, and you're creating some kind of product, and then you're reflecting throughout the whole process, and then you're going back to that original question, and it might come up with a new question. So, I mean, I think the same thing that we do as practitioners with action research is what we want our students to be really strong in, is developing good questions. The design, the engineering design process is a lot about both developing questions, but then also like coming up with plans and designs, and then creating and evaluating, testing, and then improving upon.
So can I ask you real quick, when you ask kids to pull evidence of their design process, are you saying, okay, guys, I want you to pull evidence of your design thinking? Or do you say, I want you to pull evidence of the different elements that you were just talking about within the design thinking?
Yeah, I think breaking it down into like, okay, because like in the next generation science standard language, also found within the transferable skills as well. Like when you,
right.
informed and integrative thinking or whatever, you know. So I think we break it down. So because otherwise it's too big. So can you know, design, you know, a solution to a problem, can analyze data, can test, and then reflect, and then redesign. The redesign piece is really big. So, but that doesn't mean it just has to be in science, because that same process can be, you know, any kind of project. You can use that same idea in any kind of project. It doesn't have to be the scientific process. So, but it's broken into those little pieces. And I think that the language of Common Core, like when you look at Common Core language in our learning targets and the language in our next generation science standards and C3, you can find that those same words, those verbs are all there, you know, and so it's like using that as part of your process. And, you know, we look at that as a cycle, and that image is, you know, taught from like the day one about the cycle and the design process and how we think also as human beings. So I think you can extract that language from all of our standards, our proficiencies, our learning targets, because those verbs are all there, they're strong verbs, but we might all look at it a little differently or call it something different.
Right. Well, I'm just, you know, also the state has adopted the C3 standards in social studies, which are all about compelling questions and inquiry. But I'm also just thinking back to the original question, which is the numbers of learning objectives, and how do you, you know, boil down the design process to a few really key ideas, or, you know, the learning targets from whatever standards you want to pull from, and then work on teaching that with kids, right? And what's that going to look like? So Allison, what about you? How have you found, like, pulling evidence? When you talked about the NGSS a little bit before, how many like groups of objectives are there, and how are you managing the number of objectives in science to get evidence for your kids?
Yeah, that's exactly why when we're reflecting on the standard level, because that level is just so nitty gritty, right? Instead of reflecting on analyzing data and your engineering design process and your solution, if you're simply talking about engineering as a whole, that's a much more like holistic reflection than if you're like nitty gritty, like, oh, I was developing because I didn't get this and this, but then like on this part I was proficient. Like that's just the weeds. Whereas like if they are on the standard level, the reflections are much better.
Okay, so you have found that the reflections, by keeping them sort of at that standard level, they've been more effective for you?
And that might go into maybe it's not, you know, and I'm reflecting, is it not, maybe it's not student friendly language. So that's why they don't feel as comfortable reflecting on the PI. Maybe that's why I found more success reflecting on the standard level, because at the indicator, it's written by me. And maybe that's not like that isn't happening.
Okay. And Maura, I guess, and Kevin, what are your thoughts?
I think, you know, as I'm hearing this, I think this is one of those instances where when we talk about grain size, that's what we're really talking about. And so, you know, we have our classroom level objectives, which are in that student friendly language, which are at that small, sort of that smallest grain size level. And then we might have a reporting statement, which might be more of a performance indicator depending on the genre. So that would be the next level. And then we might have our graduation domains, which depending on how your school reports, could be your reporting statement, or it could be the umbrella that houses everything. And so I think as we're talking about grain sizes, it's so important that we make those connections for kids. So just as Allison is saying, and I think she's right on that, she's going to have her kids reflect on engineering. However, they're going to be working on these smaller classroom level, the small grain size in the classroom, because that's how we build our learning sequences for kids. But our kids need to know what we're asking them to do today is connected to engineering, and this is how. And this is how it's going to help you take that next step. So we do have to make those connections for kids across the grain sizes. But if we do stay at that small grain size level, that's when it feels like the numbers are so big. Right. And so when we're talking about numbers, that's why it's kind of hard to have a hard number of a recommendation, if you will.
Okay, thank you. Kevin, thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with everything Maura just said. I know what we've been doing in Shannon County, Champlain Valley. We've been working at a committee level where we're looking at our Common Core standards and the transferable skills and coming up with specific learning targets that, so we're not really, it's more of a mesh between the two. So it's definitely taking care of the quantity in terms of, when we're sending out a jump rope report, it's not too long and looking at all the different targets that we're hitting. But one thing I always worry about when we start talking about, learning targets and learning objectives, and it's teachers who are getting like a PLP off the ground. I worry sometimes that people are looking at a PLP as a place where we can assess these things, and then it turns the PLP into another method of assessing students. And that's just one thing I think it's really important that we always make sure it's really clear that the PLP is its own thing that shouldn't feel like it's worked for a grade. And it's okay to keep them separate, but at the same time have them influence each other. It's that finding that I don't know, that fine line there to make sure everything's integrated, but you're not saying, okay, I'm grading you on this, or you have to have this learning objective in your PLP. So I feel like that's just such a balancing act we have to do as educators to make sure we're not turning a PLP into a form of assessment.
And
I think I wanted to say, can I say something? I would totally agree with that. I want to make sure that when I was talking before, when I think about the PLP, it's at the middle that it's about the transferable skills, and it's not about the nitty gritty. I was thinking about like, how do we design our learning opportunities in the classroom, and so that kids can find ways to demonstrate proficiency. But I absolutely agree with Kevin that it's, that is not a place for assessment. It's a place for them to pull evidence, because the transferable skills are going to be with them their whole life in school. And so that's for them to see growth over time in those, domains. And so, and that's really where they are thinking about what is a good piece of evidence for this, where they are choosing, not having the educator choose or say this. We might provide some like Maura was saying earlier, like, here's 5 different things that would be good use of, that would be good indicators of clear and effective communication for the week. But you might have something else that you want to put in there. So
I think those are 2 really great reminders, always about the PLP not being a form of assessment. And it's not, I in no way want to imply that it is. It's just a question of, how are we organizing our learning community so that kids are understanding what we're looking for, and they're able to pull evidence and develop goals so that they continue to develop evidence that shows their growth in learning. And again, as always, you guys make some amazing points that just continue to keep me thinking. One of the issues, I want to move on now to just another issue that Maura had mentioned, which is transitions. And I just want to talk about this for a little bit, but many of us are in schools or in programs where kids are transitioning either from 8th grade to high school, or maybe even just 7th to 8th grade. And how are people dealing with like transitions? Do you have systems in place? I know a lot of schools kind of do okay, our kids are going to go over for one day, and then that's it, and then they show up on the first day of school. But how do you guys, in a nutshell, handle transitions, and what does that look like? We're now, even though it doesn't feel like it, we're now in the middle of April. We have just a few weeks really left with our kids. And so how are you guys transitioning your students to that next level? And why don't we start with Allison this time?
Sure, not a huge transition. The 9th graders move into as sophomores. Last year we met with the 9th grade and 10th grader on teams. So same 4 teachers have half of the students on each team, and they go and they move together as a team, for better or for worse. So we had that transition meeting where the teachers could hear about the progress. And this year we're trying something new. At the end of May, we're going to do a celebration of learning as kind of this transition, so that sophomore teachers can come and watch their Google site presentations and hear about who they are and their progress this year. So we're piloting that this year. I'm not sure how it's going to work, but I see that as part of the transition to 10th grade.
Awesome. Lindsay.
So we have, we're a 6-8 school. We have straight 6th grade teams and then 7th and 8th grade looping teams. And in the 8th grade year, I think it's around January. I currently have 7th graders, but around January they start meeting they have like trips to the high school. The high school comes here. They meet with our guidance counselor, and they start thinking about the opportunities that are available to them at the high school, and course selection. We have like the extracurriculars come and share. They have a number of different days where they go there. They come here. There's a lot of back and forth, and then they have an orientation day before the rest of the school begins. It's a big transition because we actually are moving buildings and into a really large building from 8th grade to 9th grade. But I think that they spend a good half of their 8th grade year starting to build towards that, transition and having meetings and really connecting the kids with the opportunities that they can explore when they get to high school.
Okay, thank you. Maura?
At People's Academy middle level, one of the things that we always did at the end of the year is we would have, we called it our PLP showcase, but we used the PLP as a way to sort of frame the transition conversations that were happening. So for example, last year, our 8th graders, when they went to 9th grade, we did all these different steps getting them ready. But what they did is they actually went to their TA that they were a part of. And we have multi-age TAs in the high school, and they shared their parts of their PLP or something that they were proud of with their TA teacher and a few members of their TA that they would be in the next year, sort of to get to know each other. And we would also have, if let's say you taught 7th and 8th grade, this incoming 6th graders would come and join your TA with their PLPs and meet with a PLP partner and the teacher and sort of get to know each other that way. And so really thinking about, I think we talk a lot about having authentic audiences for our kids, and especially with the PLP, trying to get them in front of people, just sort of kids put so much into them and they're so personal. And so really making sure that we're creating avenues for us to honor that. And I think transitions are a nice way to think about doing that.
All right. And again, in our prior to the call, Maura and I were just talking about how important those transitions are, or Kevin and I were also doing that because my daughter is transitioning. And, are we also addressing some of the emotional issues that are happening with the, with the transitions? Not only, it's a bigger building, but there's also different issues that they're going to be dealing with. And are we, making sure that we're helping these kids, emotionally make that transition? Because like for my kid, she's really going to miss some of the things that she's been at a school for 3 years. She's going to miss familiar faces. She's going to miss routines. She's going to miss, the library. And how do you make sure that kids going to the next level start to develop that level of comfort? And I mean, it sounds like Lindsay, that's way more contact than our kids have with the 9th grade. And I just wonder how we can continue to think about that as part of the PLP, part of the transition, part of the Act 77 process, making sure that, and especially making sure that kids who have a wide range of interests that we've seen develop through those PLPs can be met at the next level, or that we're passing along that information. And that's really good feedback. The last thing I have, we're almost out of time here. I just want to hear what people are looking for in terms of professional development, and what people are doing this summer, or if you have there's any late spring workshops you're looking at. I'll start. I'm doing a climate creative at Shelburne Farms, where we're looking at, I'm going to meet for a day this spring and then 2 days over the summer. And I believe it's in conjunction with artists that Shelburne Farm has brought together to teach climate issues and sustainability issues. And so I'm looking forward to that. And one of the reasons Lindsay has really gotten my attention with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm seeing more and more teachers are using those and that framework. And to me, that fits in really nicely with the design thinking and the project-based learning with authentic audiences and seeing real problems and solving them. So hopefully that climate creative is, I'm going to try and, those are some of the same people who are working on the, Jen Cirillo from the Cultivating Pathways to Sustainability, along with Lindsay. And hopefully that work is going to dovetail. And that's something I'm really looking forward to. And then just to remind people out there, the Middle Grades Institute, June 25th through the 29th, registration's open. What are other people seeing out there that they're interested in or that they would recommend for teachers who continue to work on Act 77 and implementing it in their classrooms?
This past weekend, actually on Saturday, I went to the ECET2 conference, Vermont and New Hampshire, run by teachers for teachers. That was amazing in terms of kind of like the leadership that it takes to navigate change and different initiatives coming through. Just a phenomenal speakers, National Teachers of the Year, Vermont, New Hampshire Teachers of the Year, really great think tank and reflection tank. And then this summer, I'll be finishing up my St. Michael's Master's in Curriculum. I cannot say enough about how how nice it has been to collaborate with teachers from around the state who are going kind of like this, but on just a more sustained scale. Teachers going through all the same initiatives and working it out together.
Awesome. Lindsay?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about a course being offered through UVM this summer called Equity, Education, and Learning. And
is that with Rebecca Haslam?
It's not with Rebecca, but she's offering a course at St. Mike's.
Right,
so I highly recommend that people take that. It might be during middle grades. I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
I did see her post something, and but this is actually with a couple different facilitators, and it's both online and residential and some Zoom calls. So it's a really hybrid kind of course. And I definitely, that's something that I'm, really kind of want to continue exploring more and more is the educational equity issues. And so I'm considering taking that class. There's also the international conference for restorative practices in schools, and I don't have the exact name of it, but it's happening at UVM. Also, actually, the week of, I can tell you the exact name, 2018 International Restorative Justice Conference, Global Unity and Healing. It's at UVM, being held at UVM, and it's the same week of middle grades, but kind of at the tail end, June 28th through 30th. So if people are interested in restorative practices in the school, restorative justice, that's happening. And then there's also the international, I'm not going to get it right, but the International Conference on the Amplification of Student Voice. That's Up for Learning, co-sponsors it. It's at UVM. Also happening the week of the Middle Grades Institute. But I've gone in the past when it wasn't, and it's an excellent place to collaborate with people from all over the world around youth-adult partnerships and student voice.
Awesome. Maura?
I just want to echo sort of what everyone's saying. I don't have any additional courses, but Dynamic Landscapes is happening at the end of May.
Yep.
If that's something that you've never been to before, it can be nice to go, especially if you're getting your feet wet with technology integration and just some different pieces. It's a good way to end the year on a reflective note and also think about some things to do for the future. So I would say that. And then everyone I'm talking to, encouraging them to sign up for Middle Grades Institute.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for the summer whenever it comes. I'm telling you what, you see the weather, it's still like snowing. We can still be skiing.
Yeah.
Right? But thank you very much, everybody, for all the work that you're doing. Really appreciate it. And know that you guys are just real models for the teachers out there. And I'm pointing other teachers in your direction because you're doing great work, and I very much appreciate it. Also, thanks to the Tarrant Institute and the Middle Grades Collaborative for their work. Our next webinar is May 17th, which is a Thursday, And hopefully by that time, we'll have temperature above 50 degrees. There'll be green on the trees, and we'll all be happy and warm. Okay? Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye now.
Bye.